One of the most expensive mistakes an adult can make is to confuse a familiar expense with a justified expense. That sounds simple, but it explains an enormous portion of why so many hardworking people keep earning more money without ever feeling stronger. They look at the month and they do not see anything dramatic. No yacht, no private jet, no reckless weekend in Monaco. Just groceries, a few takeout meals, a new phone because the old one felt slow, a couple of subscriptions, a dinner here, a quick coffee there, a car payment that seemed manageable when they signed the papers, some household purchases that look reasonable in isolation. Then the month ends, the bank balance looks insultingly small, and they ask the question nearly every ordinary person asks now: where did it all go? The answer, most of the time, is not mystery. It is not bad luck. It is not that you forgot some hidden bill. The answer is that a great many things modern people are still treating as normal purchases are no longer normal values. And if you do not understand the difference between a normal purchase and a normal value, you can spend years behaving responsibly on the surface while slowly sabotaging your future underneath. That is what I want to talk about. Not frugality for its own sake. Not living like a monk. Not turning life into an endless spreadsheet of punishment. I want to talk about value deterioration. I want to talk about the point at which common expenses stop being useful tools and start becoming little anti-compounding machines, because that is what many of them have become. The old consumer equation used to be much simpler. You spent money on something because it was convenient or durable or enjoyable or efficient enough relative to the price that the trade made sense. Now, in category after category, the prices have floated upward, the quality has floated sideways or downward. The emotional manipulation has grown more sophisticated, and millions of people are still spending as if the original bargain exists. It often does not. And the first step in protecting your wealth is learning to say very clearly, this category has changed. That is a powerful sentence, not, I can never buy this again. Not, people who buy this are stupid. Not, I must remove all pleasure from my life. Just this. The bargain changed. Once you say that out loud, you begin thinking like an allocator instead of a consumer. Consumers ask, can I fit this in the budget? Allocators ask, what is the actual exchange here? What am I really getting? And what does this purchase steal from future me if I keep repeating it? That second way of thinking is how wealth gets built. Now let us start where many people bleed money while still telling themselves they are being practical. Fast food. There was a time when fast food made an ugly kind of sense. It was not healthy. It was not elegant. It was not a ritual of quality. It was speed, calories, and a low enough price that the compromise felt rational. That was the trade. You gave up quality for price and convenience. But if the price no longer remains low, then the whole structure collapses. You are no longer making a cheap compromise. You are paying a surprisingly expensive price for food that still behaves like compromised food. That is what so many people have not emotionally updated. They still buy the category using old mental pricing. They remember the story, not the current arithmetic. And that habit is devastating because fast food rarely enters life as a one-time luxury. It enters as repetition. A few times a week, then more. Then the coffee ad, on, then the delivery fee. Then the I was too tired to cook tax. Soon the person is spending premium money on low-value food under the comforting illusion that he is still making the efficient choice. He is not. He is just funding a habit that no longer has the economic justification it once had. The same thing has happened to casual dining. I am not against going out to eat. I enjoy a good meal as much as the next person, and I understand perfectly well that life cannot be lived only in terms of maximum efficiency. But people must stop pretending that restaurant spending is still what it was. The modern sit-down restaurant bill has become a strange little ceremony of silent surrender. You order what looks like a modest night out. A couple of entrees, maybe a drink, maybe an appetizer, maybe dessert. If you momentarily forget how arithmetic works, then the bill arrives and the evening has quietly consumed a sum that could have bought groceries for days, funded investment contributions, or meaningfully reduced a debt balance. The problem is not that one meal bankrupts anyone. The problem is that restaurant spending has become one of the easiest ways for middle-class people to convert thousands of dollars a year into nothing but temporary satisfaction. And then they wonder why saving always feels hard. Wealth is usually not destroyed by one giant sinful purchase. It is softened by repeated expensive convenience that no longer deserves its price. This becomes even clearer when you move to cars. I have always thought the modern obsession with new cars reveals how bad most adults are at distinguishing pleasure from value. A new car is one of the cleanest examples of a purchase that provides a short emotional spike and a long financial hangover. People still talk about new cars as though they were proofs of adulthood, competence, and reward. I see them as giant prepayments on future limitation. The depreciation problem is obvious enough, and yet people still refuse to emotionally accept it. The moment the car leaves the lot, value leaves with it, but the financial damage does not stop there. The owner now has the payment, the higher insurance, the higher repair ecosystem once warranty games begin to wear off, the pressure to protect something expensive, the status attachment that makes him want to replace it again before the current debt is even finished. A good used car, by contrast, is one of the least glamorous but most beautiful acts of financial intelligence in the modern world. It says, "I want the utility without paying for the fantasy." That sentence can make a person rich over time, because every category that strips out fantasy leaves more cash for ownership elsewhere. That is the whole game. You are not trying to spend nothing. You are trying to refuse fantasy markups often enough that a real balance sheet can emerge. The same principle applies to luxury clothing, and here again people become emotional because identity is involved. I have no objection to quality. Quality is wonderful. Good materials, good construction, durability, fit, and usefulness can absolutely justify spending more. But the logo game is not a quality game. It is a social signaling game with insane margins. People buy fabric and imagine they purchase status. More often they purchased insecurity in a prettier wrapper. The great tragedy of branded luxury for ordinary earners is that it asks them to spend compounding capital on visible proof that they are succeeding at exactly the stage when they should be using that same capital to become the kind of person who no longer needs visible proof. That is a brutal trade, and most people making it are not even honest about what they are buying. They tell themselves they are buying craftsmanship. Sometimes they are, more often they are buying recognition. They want strangers to know the item cost more. They want to feel included in a world that prices things high enough to function like admission tickets. I understand the psychology. I do not respect the arithmetic. The arithmetic says the middle class is constantly being invited to perform wealth before it has built wealth. That is not fashion. That is sabotage. Vacations have become another category where the emotional story is older than the economic reality. Travel can be one of life's great joys. I am not blind to that. A good trip can sharpen you, humble you, educate you, reconnect you with people, and restore your sense that life is larger than your routines. But once again, a category can remain spiritually valuable while becoming financially bloated. That is what many people fail to recognize. They still speak about travel as though every trip were automatically a wise investment in life experience. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is just debt with photos. The modern vacation industry has become extraordinarily good at turning ordinary rest into a premium consumption event. Flights, hotels, fees, surge pricing, add-ons, the social pressure to make the trip worth it, and the quiet belief that if you are spending this much, you may as well spend a bit more. Suddenly, what could have been rejuvenation becomes a financial recovery project. The worst part is that people now feel morally licensed by the language of experiences. They tell themselves that unlike buying objects, they are investing in memories. Fine. But paying interest on memories because you could not actually afford the trip is not wisdom. It is delayed stress disguised as self-care. I would much rather see someone take smaller, cheaper, more frequent breaks that fit inside a strong financial life than watch him stage one expensive performance vacation a year while the credit card quietly fattens in the background. Streaming subscriptions look harmless by comparison, which is exactly why they are so dangerous. People are wired to respect large visible bills and ignore small recurring ones. That is how modern consumer systems get built. Not around one giant act of foolishness, but around invisible repetition. A streaming service is $10. Another is $15. Another gets bundled. Another comes free for a few months and then begins extracting rent from your bank account with all the emotional force of a mosquito. By themselves, none of them matter together. They begin to form a recurring tribute paid by tired people who have stopped auditing comfort. That is what subscriptions are at their worst: unaudited comfort. Not just entertainment. Gym memberships no one uses. Software no one opens. Recurring upgrades, cloud storage, memberships, app services, media bundles, premium plans, all sold on the premise that convenience is too small to question. Small is exactly what makes it worth questioning. Big expenses train scrutiny, small expenses evade it. And over the course of years, evasion is expensive. This is why I tell people to audit not only by category but by emotional inertia. Ask yourself not just what am I paying, but what am I paying simply because canceling would require 3 annoying steps and an honest admission that I am not using this. That question alone will save many people far more than they expect. Electronics occupy a similar psychological territory. The phone still works, the laptop still works, the tablet is more than adequate. But a new version appears, and with it comes the seductive modern lie that slight improvement equals necessary replacement. It usually does not. Technology companies have become masters at monetizing impatience. They no longer need your device to fully fail. They only need to make your current device feel emotionally old. That is much easier. People say they are upgrading for productivity. Sometimes that is true. More often they are buying relief from the faint irritation of living with something that no longer feels new. That is an expensive feeling to obey every 2 years. A device should be replaced when the replacement produces enough real functional advantage, durability, or time savings to justify the cash outlay. Most of the time, that threshold is much later than people admit. What destroys wealth in this category is not the single phone. It is the repeated obedience to upgrade culture. You keep replacing tools that still function, because culture has convinced you that age itself is a defect. The same disease infects household goods, kitchen gadgets, furniture, and the entire ecosystem of domestic aspiration. There is an astonishing amount of money being wasted by people trying to create a lifestyle photograph instead of a durable home. They buy specialized appliances they barely use, premium branded cleaning products that perform almost identically to generic ones, kitchen gadgets for activities they engage in twice a year, decorative objects whose main function is to reassure them that their lives are taking shape. There is nothing wrong with wanting a pleasant home. There is a great deal wrong with financing or overpaying for domestic perfection when your balance sheet is still thin. This is one of the least discussed wealth killers in the middle class. Not indulgence in the obvious sense, but aesthetic inflation. People keep spending as though every room must become a statement, every item a premium version, every household decision a chance to display taste and adulthood. But adulthood is not premium cookware. Adulthood is positive cash flow. It is an emergency fund. It is no high-interest consumer debt. It is money moving every month into assets you own rather than appearance you curate. Furniture is especially revealing because it shows how quickly people stop thinking like buyers and start thinking like monthly payment hosts. The moment someone agrees to finance a couch, I know the language of cash flow has already left the room. A couch is not an income-producing asset. It is not a strategic machine. It is a place to sit. If your lifestyle now requires installment plans on places to sit, then it is not the couch that is the problem. It is the standard you are trying to impersonate. That brings us to the deepest category of all status spending. This is where the whole modern anti-wealth machine reveals itself most clearly. Status spending is not about utility. It is not even mainly about pleasure. It is about using money to purchase visible evidence that you are not behind. That is why it is so destructive, because it turns spending into theater, and theater is bottomless. There is always a nicer watch, a better badge, a fresher model year, a more exclusive logo, a more expensive restaurant, a more impressive holiday, a more premium neighborhood, a more current aesthetic, a more enviable photo. And because the goal is social comparison rather than functional sufficiency, there is no natural endpoint. You can never finally buy enough to relax. That is why status spending is not a luxury problem. It is a structural poverty machine for people who earn decent money but cannot stop auditioning for approval. Actually, wealthy people often have far less need for these auditions than aspirational spenders do. The wealthy may buy expensive things. Yes, but the true danger lies in the professional class and middle class using the same categories to project success before success is financially secured. That is how the appearance of wealth eats the foundation of wealth. I have said for many years that you can look rich or become rich, but for a long stretch of ordinary adult life, you usually cannot optimize both at the same time. The reason is simple. The dollars that produce future wealth need to remain unconsumed long enough to become assets. If you spend those dollars maintaining a surface identity, they never get the chance. That is why I call much of modern consumption Anti-compounding. It does not just cost money once. It steals the future earnings that money could have produced. A $50 dinner is not $50. It is $50 plus what $50 invested and left alone might have become. A $1,000 phone upgrade is not a $1,000 phone upgrade. It is $1,000 removed from future optionality because your present self preferred novelty to leverage. A giant car payment is not a transportation expense. It is a recurring withdrawal from future freedom. This does not mean never spend. It means demand more from what you spend. Demand real utility. Demand long life. Demand repeated use. Demand honest joy. Demand enough value that the purchase remains defensible even after the emotional sugar rush leaves. And on the other side, become ruthless about categories whose economics have clearly broken. Fast food that still pretends it is cheap. Dining out that still pretends it is casual. Cars that still pretend they are rewards rather than contracts. Designer labels that still pretend they are craftsmanship when they are often just broadcasting equipment. Travel that still pretends every trip is soul work. Subscriptions that still pretend they are too small to matter. Electronics that still pretend improvement equals necessity. Household goods that still pretend price means value. Status purchases that still pretend strangers are the audience that determines your worth. Once you see these categories clearly, the goal is not deprivation. The goal is reallocation. Cook more. Eat out deliberately, not automatically. Drive the car longer. Buy used more often. Keep the phone until the functional case for replacement becomes overwhelming. Cancel the subscriptions you forgot were drafting your life. Use generic where generic truly works. Buy quality when quality is real. Pay cash for objects whenever possible. So the absurdity of the price cannot hide behind monthly delusion. Most importantly, stop asking, can I technically afford this? That is a weak question. A lender can technically afford a lot of things on your behalf. A weak budget can technically survive a great many stupid choices one at a time. The better question is, does this purchase deserve the part of my future I am about to exchange for it? That question changes everything, because it forces you to confront trade. Honestly, it forces you to admit that every repeated modern overpay category is not just a drain on current cash flow, it is an obstacle to the reserve account, the brokerage account, the debt payoff, the optionality, the peace, the eventual freedom. That is why financial comfort is so often built by people whose lives look boring from the outside. They are not boring. They simply stopped paying premium prices for low-grade value. They learned to recognize when a category had become absurd and quietly opted out. That is a profoundly powerful skill. It is also one of the least glamorous, which is why so few people train it. They would rather search for a better stock tip than interrogate their own consumption patterns. But in many cases, the fastest investment improvement available is not a better asset allocation. It is the elimination of overpriced nonsense, repeated 3 times a week. Here is the irony. Once you stop paying for so many weak value propositions, your life often improves. You eat better, you owe less, you feel less manipulated, your home fills with fewer pointless objects, your stress declines, because you are no longer constantly trying to convert money into image. And the growing pile of retained capital begins doing something no status object can do. That is why I do not think the central lesson here is stop spending. The real lesson is stop paying old emotional prices for categories whose economic value has changed. That is the skill. The world changed. Pricing changed. Marketing became more aggressive. Convenience got monetized harder. Status became easier to purchase and more expensive to maintain. If your behavior does not update with those changes, then your bank account becomes the casualty of your nostalgia. You keep buying as if the old bargain still exists. In many categories, it does not. So here is the test I want you to use from now on. Before you spend on any repeated category, ask 3 questions. Has the value proposition genuinely held up? Am I buying utility or am I buying identity, relief, or laziness at a premium? And if I repeat this purchase pattern for 5 years, what does it do to my freedom? Those are adult questions. Not whether it is on sale, not whether everybody does it, not whether the payment is manageable. Freedom is built by people willing to ask adult questions in childish markets. That is what modern consumer life has become. A childish market, bright colors, emotional triggers, urgency language, fake necessity, social proof, subtle shame, performance signals. Every category quietly reaching into your pocket and telling you the reach is reasonable because everyone else seems to be tolerating it. You do not have to tolerate it. In fact, some of the richest households over the next 20 years will simply be the ones who learned to say no to the absurd categories before everyone else did. Not because they became misers, because they became allocators. They stopped being impressed by what was normal. They started asking what was worth it. That is a much better way to live, and over time it is a much better way to get rich.